This is Getting Past the Subtitles. I am Sean Peel,
This is DK Lee.
and welcome to the Nightcast. Not that would be relevant to anybody who listens because they don't know the time of day. But usually we do these in the day. We don't usually do this at night, and it's past my bedtime. We are in week number 2 of our time travel, time-themed series. And so last week we kicked it off with Time Traveler, the girl who leapt through time. The live action from 2010, which was like a sequel, reboot kind of thing. It's really based on the novel. But yeah, go check that episode out if you watched it. You want to be part of the conversation. But now we on week number 2. And this week we saw Heaven's Soldier, released in 2005. And this one was directed by Joon-Ki Min. And I think this was like the only movie that he's done, or at least that was on his IMDb. But an interesting film, very kind of Hollywood blockbuster kind of thing. I think it was released in July or something, so it very much has that like summer blockbuster feel. But I found it interesting with like a bit of a political twist that we can kind of like talk about later. But this was your pick, Lee. So why don't you tell us why it was a fit and what were your first impressions after watching it?
My first impressions was quite similar to what I expected to get out of this movie. Honestly, I didn't think this was going to be like the greatest movie of all time, or it will give me some kind of unique insight or anything like that. I just thought it would be a fun movie, kind of just to watch and to see these characters go back in time. And if you're familiar with Lee Joon-Shin, you'll know of like just how like crazy of a general he was. So just seeing that as well and kind of putting a twist to kind of who he is, and because like, you know, in Korea, Lee Joon-shin is really revered as basically the savior of Korea. So seeing him in this different light and putting a different twist on him and kind of showing like maybe he wasn't, you know, always the kind of general that we expect him to be, and maybe he kind of had a human aspect to him too, and just kind of a normal dude who stepped up to the plate, kind of like that. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But I think as a movie, like, it's not the greatest movie, you know. It's not like,
I'm not going into it like, oh, this is an Academy Award, yo. Like,
it's not gonna win any Academy Awards. Let's just say that. But it is a fun movie to watch. I think it's a little, I guess, over the top. But I think if you're watching a time travel comedy slapstick action movie, then it's kind of par for the course. So I think, you know, it's okay.
It's definitely like, I mean, it's definitely dramatic and outlandish in the plot and how it goes. But like you said, I mean, once you're throwing in like modern day soldiers time travel to the past and then meet like Lee Joon-shin and then have to save Korea kind of plot, like at that point anything goes, you know. Like I'm not going to take this too seriously. And then it just becomes like I'm scaling it on an entertainment value than anything else, you know. And in that regard, it's good. Like it's really an entertaining film through and through. Like you'll have a good time watching it, or at least I have.
Yeah. And one other thing is the time traveling aspect of it was a lot more subtle than the girl who left through time. So I give that a pass.
It wasn't like it was definitely more subtle. It was more simplified, I guess. Or I don't know, like Oh well, I mean, there's no CGI craziness that like
Well, there is
compared to
CGI,
Time
but it's
Traveler.
very it's not it's it has aged better than the other one. Let's just say
Yeah,
that.
and it happened 5 years prior.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but like the way that the time travel is conducted is still like goofy. Like
Mhm.
it's
Yeah,
because of a
for sure.
comet, which is like, oh yeah, we're just gonna roll with that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I mean, for me, like I said, it was really entertaining for my first impression. Um, I mean, it really kept my interest. And like I said before, it like as an entertaining film, it's great. And then it also, it kind of has a bit of a message in there too, with kind of like Korean unification. Like it's very like pro that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's all about North Korea and South Korea like uniting together and like overcoming their differences and kind of telling their story. It's
Mhm.
like there's such a huge difference that we can kind of talk about between like when we were watching JSA compared to this movie. Like
Mhm.
they're both pro like reunification in that message, but the way
Yeah.
that the movie is made is completely different, right?
Right. The approach that they have, I guess,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
towards the movie.
And which, funny enough, like I mean, they both work. Like they do how they do it in their own lane, kind of works. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure.
Um, so why don't you walk us through what exactly did we watch here?
So Heaven Soldier starts out with um, military leaders from North and South Korea. They meet at the DMZ in a like an underground facility to discuss a nuclear warhead that they had made, but they have international pressure to relinquish the nuclear warhead, the
Mm,
North to relinquish the nuclear warhead, and they're kind of basically forced to do that. So the North Korean officer, Major Kang Min-gil, he's not happy with the fact that they have to give up the nuclear warhead. So he, along with a group of his loyal soldiers, decides to steal the warhead and take it somewhere else. And while this is happening, the South Korean forces get notified of what's happening, and the military leaders from both sides they decide to send a special forces to go and capture um, Major Kang Min Gil, and the leader of this group is Major Park Jong Woo.
mm,
And so, on the river, while they are chasing Kang Min Gil and his soldiers, they kind of get into a standstill. But while they're fighting, in the middle of the fight, a comet basically hits the water, and the people around the comet get taken back in time. And so these two groups of soldiers, the North Korean soldiers led by Kang Min-gil and the South Korean soldiers led by Park Jong-woo, they are taken back in time, and they are taken to a period of time in 1592. I think that is correct, right?
sounds about right.
And they're in the middle of this like basically a skirmish that's happening, and they are kind of shocked and they're not sure what's happening. But like these people with like swords and arrows start shooting them and attacking them, so they fight back and they win because obviously they have better weapons and they have guns and grenades, and so they basically win the battle in the beginning. And after the people around them, after seeing what happened, they start calling them heavenly soldiers because of their ability to basically just destroy people like out of thin air. For them it's like out of thin air, so they're
Well, they
just
like
shocked at that.
technically appeared out of thin air too, so they're like,
Yeah, and they
oh,
appeared
they're
out of
from
thin air
heaven.
too. And so that's what happened. But while that's happening, they also the North Korean soldiers, they actually also took a scientist named Dr. Kim Soo-yeon, also as well. Um, it's kind of weird. I don't know why they took her, but I guess it's for the plot,
I guess, I guess
right?
she would know like what to do with the nuke because
I guess
she
yeah,
was just like,
specifics of
my
the
plan is
nukes
to
and stuff
steal
like
it,
that.
but I'm not like qualified to handle it, so let's steal the girl who is.
Yeah, okay. I guess that makes sense. So they also took the doctor as well. Oh, yeah. And so they go back in time and they ask around around the village, and they realize that they came back to I keep saying 19 1572, not
Uh,
1592,
okay.
1572. And this is a time period when Korea, also called Joseon back in that time,
Hmm.
they had a lot of Jurchen invaders that were attacking the border, and so that's why the skirmish had happened before as well. And so they're there and they're trying to figure out what's going on and trying to see how they can um, go back to the future. And so while they're doing this, there's a regional, like this weird guy who basically steals from them. And the soldiers, they go out and they are chasing this guy, and they go back into the village, but the thief, they say, the thief like cries out, "Oh, like these guys are beating me up and trying to steal from me." And so the soldiers and this guy, this thief, gets taken to the basically the police back in that time,
Sure.
and they're interrogated. And at the interrogation, um, the thief is saying like, "These guys are suspicious people, and I was, following them and pursuing them to make sure that they're not doing anything bad, and they're probably like thieves or something like that. You can check out their clothes; they're wearing some weird clothes." And he's giving all these you know
Uh,
this testimony. And while that's happening, it's like this whole comedic bit, and the thief and the soldiers, they end up being imprisoned. Either way, regardless, but all of them get imprisoned, and they're taken to the prison. But while that's happening, another group of the soldiers who were not caught, they
mm,
decide to free them, and they take him out of the prison, and they
yep.
go back to this hiding place that the thief is hiding at. And
Mm,
the thief had hidden the guns and stuff, so the soldiers are trying to figure out like where he hid it. And meanwhile, while that's happening, um, the North Korean soldiers are trying to find the nuclear warhead that was missing while
right.
they traveled back in time. So they're trying to find the nuclear warhead, while the South Korean soldiers are trying to find the ammunitions and the guns and stuff like that. But the thief, whose name is Lee Sun-shin, he is actually, like we mentioned, a
Mm,
general who later becomes pivotal in fending off the Japanese invasion. But
right.
he has stolen the guns and he hid it somewhere. But while he's like burying it, a little girl sees him burying it, and she later comes back to the hiding area and takes one of the pistols and goes back. And while she's going back, um, some of the Jurchen spies, they see her and they take her hostage, and basically um, uses her as a way to um, try to get Izunshin to tell them like uh, where those soldiers are, so that the Jurchens can basically kill them.
Uh,
And so Izunshin gets captured as well, but Izunshin is saved by the North Korean soldiers, who happen to be looking around for the nuclear warhead, and the nuclear warhead was actually in the uh, Jurchen area for some reason. And it's not ever like
no,
told
it's just
why.
there.
It's just there. They were scouting around for it, and I guess they saw it there. But it's weird because like they have it, like the Jurchen people actually have it in their
Yeah.
tent. So
Who
after
knows?
retrieving the nuclear warhead, the doctor, she calculates the comet and realizes that in a few days, the comet will come back. So if we're at the right place, then we can go back to the future. But then she also realizes that time flows differently in the past
Right.
compared to the future. So it's gonna be a little faster than she anticipated. And the South Korean major Park, he actually wants to train Lee Sun-shin because he knows from the future that he's going to
Yeah.
become this great general. So he's trying his best to try to, like, you know, make him go towards that path. But
Yeah.
Lee Sun-shin is like, no, that's not what I want to do. I'm just a petty thief. And he also smuggles ginseng, so he's like a ginseng smuggler as well. And he's evading the law and stuff like that.
Right.
And so there's all of this different tension going on while that's all happening. And at the end, after the death of one of the soldiers, the South Korean soldiers, who was getting close to Lee Sun-shin, and they were starting to become like brothers, quote unquote, right? He actually like dies all of a sudden by these Jurchen arrows that gets shot at night. And after that, like, Lee Sun-shin kind of, his heart kind of changes a little bit, and he kind of wants to, like, you know, fight for the people, the villagers and stuff like that. So by the end, Lee Sun-shin kind of rallies the villagers and they prepare to fight the Jurchen. And the South Korean soldiers and North Korean soldiers decide to help him out. And the thing is, while the battle is happening, they realize that in order for them to go back in time, go back to the present,
Right.
they actually it's at the time of the battle, so like they have to figure out what to do. And the North Korean people and the South Korean people, they decide to stay and fight with the people of the past. And basically the doctor is the only one who makes it back to the future, and the soldiers, North Korean soldiers and the South Korean soldiers, most of them they fight and they die during the battle. Right. But some of them actually they survive and they fight with Lee Sun-shin in the Japanese invasion as well and stuff like that. So that's basically how it ends. At the end, it kind of shows that the general Lee Sun-shin was able to, you know, go through all of the right processes to become the general he is now. And so that's how it ends, basically.
They become part of history.
Yeah, they become part of history.
Yeah. Moral of the character story is getting murdered, like just getting cheap shotted. Like literally every single character in this movie, except for like the two majors, just get cheap shotted. Every time.
I was so shocked when that first the private, I think, just got that first shot with like 50 arrows. I was so shocked.
He just got whacked like.
I was like, I didn't know it was this kind of movie.
You didn't know this was that kind of movie?
Yeah.
I had the same thought. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, that's PG-13 out the window.
Yeah.
But then literally everybody else dies like the same way. Like they just get hit by an arrow like out of the blue.
Yeah.
Like in that scene where the guy gets his arm chopped off from like the swordsman on the horse. Yeah. And then the North Korean or the South Korean guy goes to help him out. And they always have like this like rivalry kind of buddy relationship. Mm-hmm. And then it's like at this moment where they're like friends finally. And he's like, you can't die, like he's giving in the speech. And he takes off his helmet and then he gets like headshotted by an arrow as he's trying to put it back on.
Yeah.
It's like that's what happens when you take off your helmet for no good reason.
Never take off your helmet, bro. Never.
And then what really got me is the other guy gets like mad and emotional and like starts to go ham, but he takes off his helmet right after that happened. Like you didn't just learn the lesson that, like in front of you.
Let's keep our rational brain in check, you know?
Exactly. Like you just lost an arm. Now you're gonna sacrifice your head too.
Yeah.
But I mean, whatever. It's fine. And then like even the character that Ma Dun-suk plays, which I mean, once you see him, you always know it's gonna be a decent movie, at least.
No, surprisingly, there's a lot of A-list actors in this movie.
Mm. This is like young him, though. You know, I feel like this wasn't.
Yeah. This was when he was cheap. This was when he you know, he was cheap.
I'm still scraping together through B-rolls. Like this is that movie for him.
Yeah, but all three of the main cast, like you know, Major Kang and Major Park, and all of them were actually, they're actually really
Yeah,
well
yeah.
known now. So yeah, even the doctor Kim
Mm,
Soo-yeon.
yeah, I mean, I recognize mostly the North Korean major, uh, Kang Min-gi, that actor, probably more than anybody outside of like Ma
Oh
Dong-seok, of
really?
course. But even some of the other guys kind of look familiar. Um, what is your favorite kind of scene throughout that film?
Um,
There's a lot of good ones. I'll say that.
I actually liked the night scene when Lee Shin and the soldier, the young private, they
They're
kind of
having
like
like the heart
exchange
to heart.
words, heart to heart, and then Lee Shin kind of starts opening up a little bit, and then that like shocking moment kind of
Uh,
happens. Like that was the one moment that really just like grabbed my attention, because I wasn't like a lot of the other parts were like funny and like it's a joke, and especially like the prison scene and the interrogation scene, that was like hilarious
yeah, that
for
was
me
good.
at least.
That was funny.
Like the guy like
It
just
is like
playing with the
stink.
grenade pin and
He's like
and he
interrogated.
doesn't know
He
what
like
it
had
is
it.
at all.
He hit a grenade in his chest, and then like the interrogator like found it, and then he started
Yeah,
figuring out like he pulls the pin, and they freaked out, and he's like, "What did he say?" He's like, "Hold
it's like,
on,
I'll do
I'm gonna
whatever you
work them
want,
more."
just stop. Yeah. And just like it's all very like fun and jokes, and then that moment when they're like kind of finally like kind of making progress with Shin,
Sure.
like he just dies right away by the arrows, and like the scene, like it's like this moonlit scene, like super big moon, and like the light coming, and then the arrows just like hitting him in the back, and him saving Shin from the dying. So like that moment is very memorable and is, I think, like impactful. So I think that's like one of
Yeah,
my favorite scenes.
and he just like sacrifices himself to save
And then
them.
yeah, it's just cool because I think you realize like you can't expect anything. Like there's no, what I mean,
Mm,
like there's always something that can happen, and I like that in movies, and I think that's what one of the appeals of like Game of Thrones as well. Like
mm.
you never know what's gonna happen. Like when the bloody wedding happened, the red wedding happened.
Yeah,
That's the kind of thing that people are like, oh, like I did not see this
yeah.
coming.
Yo, that
So
family got
those
murked.
those kind of things are always kind of interesting
Yeah.
to see. So I think I like that the most in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting for me because it changed like the playing field of the movie. Like it grounded it in a different side than what you were watching beforehand.
Mm.
It gave it stake. Like at that point, you were like, oh yeah, like I don't think everybody's gonna come out alive at the end of this movie. And
Right.
interesting enough, by the end, like I mean, two people do, but like for the most part, nobody goes back home. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Technically, nobody goes back home except for the
ex-
doctor.
except for
So
the physicist.
yeah.
So it's like, oh, I see, I see. So that was an interesting way to kind of end the
Mm.
film too. I didn't even know who lived. Like those guys, I don't know who those two were.
Yeah.
Kind of like recognize them in
Madongsak doesn't
that
live.
work. Huh?
Madongsak doesn't live.
Oh no. Oh no. Yeah, I really liked the interrogation scene. That's probably like the funniest one. Even like the first scene when they get transported in the middle of the skirmish, and they're all just like, "What?" And the one soldier just like slaps himself, and he's like, "Am I dreaming?"
Yeah. And
And
then
then,
in that moment too, there's like the horseman who just like cuts off the head of the soldier in the
yeah,
very
yeah.
beginning.
And then like one of the soldiers like gets an axe thrown to his chest, and he dies. And
Yeah.
even after that, they're like still in shock in a
Mm.
way. Just like lob a grenade at the crowd. Yeah. I think it was interesting that like how much do you think like okay speaking to a person that's like doesn't know much about Korean history, right? Or like too much of kind of the culture. Like how much do you have to understand how important like Yi Sun Shin is to really like grasp the movie and like the stakes in like the relationship, you know? Because
So
I
you
won't
can
say.
think of it like
Go ahead, go ahead.
you can think of it like them going back in time to the Revolutionary War or like
Sure.
the Civil War
Mm.
and talking to like a young Lincoln or talking to a young George Washington.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's
yeah.
the scale of like importance that Lee Shin has in Korean culture.
Mm.
So you can think of it like that.
Yeah, I think like you, because like similar to me, like I like because of you, like I kind of understand who he was already, and I was like, oh yeah, like that's that guy
Mm-hmm.
because of the other movie that you recommended.
Yeah.
Um, but even like with the little knowledge that I did know, I don't think that you would need to know who he is. Like they talk about it in the film. Like
Right.
obviously, there's that whole scene where like where like Madon Suk is like super communist, and he thinks that the other hold on, what did he say in that line? Oh, Kim Il Sung had fought off the Japanese and saved Korea.
Yeah.
I love that scene. He's like super like dramatic about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, you idiot. Like, so they kind of like explain it. Like, they give you a little bit of exposition on who Lee Shin is, but
Mm-hmm.
you won't know like how important he is. Like, I
Right.
think that's kind of the problem with this movie. If you're kind of going without knowing, like, you really won't understand like the depth of like how big of a character he is,
Right.
like in history and such. So,
Yeah, this is very catered towards Korean people, obviously.
oh yeah, it's
Because
super like that.
Any Korean you ask will know who he is and
Mm,
just the importance of him
sure.
in Korean history. So like, there's no doubt. Like, as soon as you hear his name or you
Mhm.
see him mentioned, like there's context behind that. Where as
Sure.
like a foreign audience watching it, there's no context behind that. So it is obviously it's gonna hit different,
Mhm.
for a foreign audience. So that might make it a little less impactful, but I think the movie still does a pretty decent job of kind of hinting or make
Yeah.
establishing the fact that
Yeah,
he is
giving
an
you an idea. Yeah.
uh, important
Yeah.
person or a general or would be general. Like
Mhm.
so. I don't think there's any problem on that front. It's just the level of impact, I guess.
Yeah.
That yeah.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, I thought it was interesting too of like how that whole thing happened in the movie. He's just like, this jackass, is this really the Lee
Yeah.
Shin? And he's just like scratching his balls like in the corner.
Yeah. Yeah. He's he's like, I don't wanna
Yeah.
do the training
I know. They
on
have
the
to do like
waterfall.
PT, and he's like, I don't want to do any of this.
Yeah. He's like, I
Uh,
heard you're good with a bow, and he throws the bow at him. He's like,
and he's just
no.
like, nah, it doesn't even catch it. I thought that was kind of cool that like that was the huge payoff of the film, like his bow skills, you know? Like not
Yeah.
once did you see how like his legendary skills with the bow and arrow up until the ending of the film.
Mhm.
Which I knew was like as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh yeah, that's gonna be like super like something that's definitely gonna come back as a
At the
big
end.
reveal per se.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean anything else for me that I really liked? You know what? I will say that I wish that I had a DVD copy of this movie because I didn't see it in the best of quality. Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
pixelation going on.
Yeah.
I don't know about for you, but like the last scene, like the grandiose like action scene,
Mhm.
like actually looked really good. But I really couldn't make out anything of what was happening because of like all the pixelation. So I was like really like disappointed by how much I couldn't enjoy it, and I was really sitting there like this seems really nice, like really choreographed well, really good. And then it's just like constant editing and like when images are moving too fast, it all becomes a blur, and I'm like, God dang it, gosh dang it.
I think action scene wise, I don't think it was bad per se. I
Mm,
don't think there was anything like crazy. I don't think there was anything like sticking out that was bad. Um, but I don't know. I think, like you said, like you talked about the like the ambush arrows that like comes out of nowhere and like stuff like that. I think it sometimes kind of cheapens the level
Yeah.
of like action. Sometimes you're expecting like some kind of big fight or like a
Uh
some kind of uh really like one-on-one climax or something like that, but like it
right,
just
right.
ends with some like arrow that comes out of nowhere and just shoots somebody or something like that. So
Well, it's like an
uh
overused gimmick, like because they use it
yeah,
that first time, and it's like, oh, like kind of shook, and then they reused that same thing like as a cop out for all the other side characters, and
yeah.
then like the only people that get like die honorably is freaking like uh not Kamiga but Park Jung Woo, and
He technically doesn't even die. He's actually alive until
yeah, yeah, like even both of them, like it wasn't even definitive that they necessarily died per se, but I think it's kind of done that way because like none of the side characters had rivals per se.
hmm
Like there's always like one good guy versus a bad guy, and even for side characters, are like I got my eye on that guy, and then
hmm
when like the final battle happens, you'll see like a one-on-one between those people, and it's kind of like a payoff fight scene.
yeah,
But like here, there's only like the sub leader of the that
right,
tribe,
right,
and then
yeah,
like
the
the North
main
Korean
leader.
major,
Yeah, and the
and then
major,
that's
yeah.
and then that's it, and then like everybody else like doesn't have a foe to kind of connect with, so
Mhm.
in that way I guess we're just like, well, how do we kill them? Cheap shots, like
Yeah, I think that's probably like the weakest point of this movie. I think it really doesn't flesh out too much of the people of the past. I think, and kind
mm,
of the situation, right? Like the Jurchen people and like all of
church,
that.
that's right.
Like it kind of makes it kind of it's implied. Everything's implied and everything's assumed that
Sure.
you know what's going on. Whereas I think if you're a foreign audience watching this, you're kind of confused as like why are they fighting or like who are these guys and why are they like doing the stuff that they're doing.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense it might be a little confusing or like I think it's a weak link because they I think if they did flesh them out a little bit better, it
Mm,
might have made the movie a little more uh you know
right.
interesting
Yeah, no, I could
overall.
speak to that. Like, I didn't know that there were Jurchen people. Like, I had no context of who that enemy was. Like, I just knew more of like who Yushin Shin was, and then more of like, oh yeah, he's the one that is going to defend Korea from when the Japanese initially invade.
Yeah.
But before that, I didn't know of any like previous history of who else invades Korea in that sense.
Right.
So I kind of get lost in that. We just kind of pin them as the bad guy.
Yeah.
But two, I found that, I mean, we can talk about it. It's like I don't know if it's a problem per se, but I guess yeah, and the way that it's lacking, like the movie seems to like cram a lot of different elements at once, like a lot of plot lines.
Yeah.
Like the main one, there is just a lot that happens, story wise in a film. It's like, oh, North and South Korea like finally unite to make a warhead, and then then they have a falling off. Like it's just like it already starts with a bunch of like exposition, right? Like
Yeah.
this whole new thing, and then it dumps you into like they're in the middle of a firefight, then a comet comes by, and then they get time traveled to 1573 or something,
hmm
and then it's like a whole new story, and then now it's like, what time are we in? Now we got to find the warhead that goes missing. And then now you're just trying to throw in all these subplots of like, oh, the Jurchen people, and it gives you like these little scenes with the Jurchen, and kind of sets you up with like, now that the sub leader, like the general or whatever he is, has like a grudge against Park Jun Woo and like all those guys, and
Yeah.
it just keeps throwing into you all these different subplot, like then Yi Sun Shin comes out of nowhere, and then like another subplot is like Kang Min Gil has to like shape him up to take the military test again, and then on top of that, Kim Soo Hyun is trying to figure out how to get him back into the proper timeline. Like it's all these different branches that happen, and in a way, it like you kind of lose like a focus. It's like, well, what's like the actual meat of the story? You know what I mean? Like the problem is when you do that, you lose like concentration on some things. There's
Yeah,
not like a
and you
flow.
don't care for the characters as much, right? Because everything's so
Exactly.
split. Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably the biggest issue with this movie is like nothing's really fleshed out. Everything just kind of like, it's like popcorn. Hey,
Yeah,
here's one
no,
thing, here's another
here.
thing.
It like all happens in real time, and then like as the viewer, you're trying to like track like all the different characters in real
Right.
time, and there's like
And
so many different characters
and
to
everything
track in
kind of
there.
starts feeling rushed, right? At the end
Right,
too, like during the battle and stuff like that, and the time thing, and when she's like, "Oh wait, the time's
exactly.
actually going faster here or slower, whatever it is." Like
Yeah,
it just kind of feels rushed and forced a little bit, and it doesn't
hundred
feel
percent.
like fleshed out to the point where
Right, right.
you're at peace with what's going on in the scene.
Like that's the problem because once you do something like that, like you're gonna pay for it, and you're gonna pay for it at the end of the movie because
Mhm.
you gotta bring it all to an apex at some point,
Yeah.
and like at that moment is when you gotta tie the knot. So like once she like figure out it is expedited because then she's like, oh, it's gonna happen in 5 days, and then half an hour before the movie ends, she's like, oh, actually, like here's
It's gonna happen.
plot. Now the
Yeah.
reason is it got sped up to like a day earlier. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like some BS reason, and then now it's a 50-50 chance that we're gonna like be able to survive or not. And then
Yeah.
literally like just about everybody but one person is on board to do it. And then as
Mhm.
soon as they get to the boat, they all abandon ship. Like all for one guy. You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
you all changed your mind out of nowhere. So they just bounce from like one subplot to the other subplot, you know?
Yeah. I agree.
It's like, are we following like going back home, or are we gonna follow Yi Sun Shin's like leadership? You know what I mean? It all like just comes together too fast.
Yeah.
And I mean, and then it even comes like they kill Ma Dong-seok's character, like because he has to defend the boat. So it's like, well, what the heck was that even? What was the point of that? But yeah, I mean, they kind of like that's just a problem with just trying to cram so much into it. Even with like like the Jurchen people subplot, right? Like because like the big leader had like the son, and then he was like kind of like teaching him, and he was like big in the interrogation scene.
Yeah.
And then when they finally like found his son sleeping, that's where they found the warhead. Then like they murder him, and then like the grand leader is like mourning his death, and it's supposed to be this thing that like carries along through like the final invasion against like the other like Korean village people. But
Mhm.
it's like, yeah, we don't really care about that whole plot point because it's just thrown in there. Like it's never, you know what I mean?
It's like how convenient, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like just laying the crust, like laying
It's
the
like
breadcrumbs.
the Jurchen leader's son just happens to be sleeping, and the North Korean people, they just happen to be there, and
I know.
they you just happen
Happened
to
to
see the
find the
pistol. They
warhead.
happen to see the warhead. Like it's just like,
Oh, you know what? I was gonna say earlier that moment for you when like the arrows come for that one soldier. The moment for me was when they threw the spear at the little girl after the
oh,
thing.
dude.
Yeah, when that happened, I was like, okay, all bets are off now.
You're
It's
like, no,
like
they didn't. No, they didn't.
I was like, that's crossing some lines.
That is crossing many lines.
This is no longer family friendly. I was like, no. Yeah, that was rough.
But obviously, this film has underlying, themes and things that there's an agenda, I think, behind this movie. If you think
Mm.
about it, and this one is a lot more blatant, I think, in that like in how
Yeah.
the North and South, soldiers come together to fight a battle in the past, and they reflect on this great general who fought for the country, and like it's very,
Yeah.
if you think about it in that sense, is very almost propagandistic,
Yes,
and
honestly.
and very on the nose about what the movie makers, the filmmakers want out
Yeah.
of the story and the message out of this film. So I don't
I
know,
mean,
take that as you will, I guess, but it is kind of embedded a lot in Korean films, I think, especially
mm,
some of the more major blockbuster, almost like a lot of the war movies, especially they have that kind of message.
sure, yeah.
We've watched a lot of war movies already,
It seems
and
tied with that theme. Like you're gonna make a war movie. Like or if the Korean's gonna make a war movie, it's like well,
It
we can't
almost
not
always
touch on this
is.
topic.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's almost always about reunification, or an
Right.
essence of like two sides and trying to figure out how to bring them together. So
Yeah. I guess it's like, I mean, like again, like just speaking from an outside point of view, but like you talk about like war movies in general are like inherently patriotic or like
right,
nationalistic, right?
yeah,
Obviously, it's like you're fighting for your country in that sense, and like just bringing up that topic, it's like, whoa, now am I just talking about like South Korea as a nation alone, or like both Koreas?
both,
Like
yeah,
like you talk about war and like you automatically kind of have to talk about both sides because it's both Korea in history, but like
hmm,
divide, like you know what I mean? It just brings up like demons in the closet, or like skeletons in the closet kind of thing. Like definitely, I mean, it's like we said, it's super clear as to like what their stance is, like how poignant they are, and the point that they want to make.
mm,
Like I said, like how they see, reunification and how they see how they want to handle like it is super blatant. So like it is definitely biased, coming from South Korea filmmakers. So
hmm,
yeah, I mean, like this movie is just like so on the nose with it. Even even when in the scenes that they try to divide each other, like somebody, whether it's Kim Soo Young or Yi Sun Shin, will come in and like clear the air like so blatantly. Like that scene where he tries to divide like the sand and he comes in and
yeah,
just like kicks over the sand line. It's just like
yeah.
it's just so like you automatically, you know what I mean?
You're right. There's
So
always that emphasis on the line and the split and the separation, and
exactly,
then
yeah.
somebody who comes in and like kicks it down, or like even like the Ma Dong-seok character, he just goes over to get some food,
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
stuff like that.
Just like the little bits of like, you know, whatever, like patriotism is out the window. It's like about being a person, like,
Mm,
share food together. But yeah, I mean, I applaud this movie and doing that, and like I said earlier, also being just an entertaining movie, just being like a good sort of blockbuster like weekend film as well.
yeah,
Like I mean, you could. It'd be hard for you to like not see that part of the film, but at the same time, you can thoroughly like just have a good time with the movie at the same time. And I think
I think so.
it's a great way of doing that balancing act of like wanting to have a message and then making a solid film at the same time. And I think that's like compared to JSA, it's like more of a serious quote unquote film with also being like a little more subtle with the message, but like that's the way that the film was conducted. Like that was why it was made.
Hmm.
Here it's kind of like a different spectrum, but ultimately they have the same goal, right? So yeah, I mean, I applaud this movie for having depth while also being like inherently kind of superficial in a way.
Yeah.
Hey listeners, if you've tuned into more than one episode, you probably know that me and Lee are quite passionate about Asian movies. We actually got to start because we think that movies are meant to be discussed, and there are so many Asian movies out there to be discussed and to be discovered. Honestly, that goes for just about any international film, if you ask me. I've actually had an interest in podcasting before we launched one and decided to share our discussions and just launch a podcast of our own. Producing this show couldn't have been easier with Anchor. It's a true one-stop shop for literally everything podcasting. Even if you don't have the tech, Anchor is equipped with in-app recording, a music library, editing some segments, cover art. There's just so much flexibility to do. Even better, they help you distribute your podcast to popular platforms, which is why you guys can listen to us via Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you guys are listening. To ice the cake, they even help you monetize your podcast by matching you up with sponsors. You gotta trust me, they literally take care of just about everything. So if you're on the fence, just jump. There's no excuse. Go to anchor.fm or download their app. It's all free to get started today. Anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, it's just a very like crazy movie, I think. Like you just slap all of these things together and just stir it up in a pot and let's see what
Yeah,
we get kind of
it's a
movie.
lot. It is a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I really was taken aback when they killed that little girl. I was like, so what's the tone of this movie exactly
Yeah,
now?
yeah. The tone is all over the place.
I
Seriously.
was like, what?
Like that's kind of like the charm of the movie too, though. That's like the weird part. Like
Uh,
I like the fact that they kind of just go everywhere. And it's almost acceptable because it is a time travel like gimmick. Like it's just already like
yeah,
built
exactly.
into the
Yeah,
fact
yeah.
that like this is already going to be nonsensical. Just might as well indulge it, you know?
Exactly, yeah. It's like, I mean, especially when the premise of it is a comet is the reason we time traveled. Like automatically it's slapped with like don't take me serious.
Yeah.
And then for the rest of the movie, like that's what I live by. And then you're not as like shocked when everything else happens, or like you're not as like oh
You're
my
like,
god, like
okay,
what am I watching? You're just
that
like it's
works. I
all
guess that
silly.
works.
It's all silly.
Yeah.
Don't take me serious. Don't take me serious. Yeah, but I mean, still good. You know, at the end of the day, for me, it's if a movie's entertaining, it's good. You know, that's the bar. That's like the base level for me.
Mhm.
Yeah. So good pick. You know, still old. You know, you could probably pick something recent for once in your life, Lee. But so next week we're gonna talk about another older film. This one came out in 2000. It's called Ditto. Also a South Korean film directed by Kim Jong-kwang. I believe it is you are able to rent it on Amazon Prime Video if you are. I don't know if you subscribe or if you just have to get it on there, but either way, it's there. This looks like it's more of like a romance time travel kind of plot, right?
Yeah, a lot smaller in scope. Let's just say that.
Okay, yeah. This is a different vibe, guys. This is a different vibe.
But this is what I love about like time travel movies, where like you can time travel for anything, you know, for
Sure,
love,
yeah.
for war, for peace, for
For
something big or
love,
something
for
small,
hate.
for some weird message.
Yeah. You can go on some weird trip, time travel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a flexible like thing. Like it's a flexible tool.
Yeah, like what you do with it, I guess, is up to the
Yeah.
person making
And there are no rules. Like you can really just bend it how you will. Like you can go, something realistic, you can go with something like fantasy,
it. Yeah.
you could, I mean, both the movies that we watch have been out of the ordinary so far.
Yep.
But hey. But hey. So yeah, I'm pretty looking forward to this one. I do remember like seeing this movie in the poster a couple times,
Mhm.
but never actually watching it. Or I'm pretty sure I've never watched it. So it'll be a nice check off my box here. Is this your first watch, or is this like your second?
This is my first as well.
Your first yours as well. Yeah, it should be interesting. Again, it's Ditto, and we will watch it next week. See you then.
Bye bye.